So we've just taken you to the Amazon room. We've just left the Amazon room. What you saw there were high-level ministerial representatives representing different countries from all over the globe. It was truly the United States of the world, contributions from different member states making commitments, reflecting on the important themes that have been explored here in this two-day summit that is about to conclude, the REAIM summit at The Hague in the Netherlands, looking at the responsible use of artificial intelligence in the military domain, of course, hosted by the government of the Netherlands and the Republic of South Korea. So different member states committing themselves. We have been saying that we are a long way off from a global agreement, but everybody just agrees that artificial intelligence is a reality. It is permeating every area of our lives. We can't imagine our lives as civilians without it. But how do we take those values, those practices, and incorporate them into how the military conducts itself, not only in terms of security and warfare, but also disarmament, peacekeeping, evacuations, and so on. But there was also an area of decision-making that was highlighted. It was also interesting to me that as you listened to different member states, different countries that are represented here today, there is a commitment that there's a need to create equality between countries in the global north and the global south. They've all committed themselves to that. And I highlight this speech by China because those were the last speakers talking importantly about multilateralism. So in the same way that every area of international law is anchored on multilateralism, with organizations or institutions such as the United States being in the vanguard of that. Even here with AI in the military domain, it is not going to be, or it should not be, one state dominating the other, but rather multilateralism through a vehicle like the United Nations. We'll talk about this as we journey towards our closing session. But first, it's been a long day, a good long day. Let's remind ourselves of how this day started, what happened earlier this morning. Just some snippets for you. Have a look.
So, good morning, everyone. Again, an impressive opening of our second day of the REAIM 2023 conference. Of course, I hope that you've enjoyed the first day with our full-packed program, and today it will be no different. We have many breakout sessions, the Innovation Hub, several demonstrations, a student lounge, continuous online program, of course. And in addition to that, today we'll be hosting the political segment. Ministers and other political representatives of 80 countries will be engaging in a round table today.
Let me at least emphasize where we should start. What are the first principles from which we should build today? And I always think, especially today, this is an essential question to think about where we start, because we've gone forward with a trend since the development of unmanned vehicles to thinking that we just need to find the legal loophole to use the newest technology.
Accountability and responsibility is indivisible. So you give authority to the commander, and he has then to make a proper decision. What I'm looking forward, and that's why I'm so interested in this IA discussion, is about decision support.
As you all know, the performance of AI is very dependent on relevant training data. And in a military system, it's very likely that the user would like to provide that training data as a guarantee for its relevance. And if we start to use government-furnished training in our systems, then who is accountable if a system out in the field is not performing as expected?
Companies are increasingly choosing the path of offense as the best defense. So they may argue that they can legitimately protect their networks, for example, from attacks on those networks. And so there are a lot of blurred lines between civilian and military uses of technology, between war and peace, and between states and private companies. And I think in that lack of clarity, we lose accountability without a doubt.
We're so seduced by the technology. There's so much interest in using the latest thing for this. We've got to deter. The best defense is a good offense. These kind of simplistic mantras have crept into our knowledge. It's in part due to the marketing, but also to certain qualities of the new technologies.
However, the train left the station, as somebody said yesterday already, and we have to understand it, and we have to frame it legally, morally, ethically, no doubt about that.
Well, there's not that much regulation yet in any domain of AI. As many of you presumably know, the EU is working on an AI Act, and there are other related regulations that apply. For example, data protection plays a role in how the data may be handled that can then be fed into training AI, for example.
I think the situation with cyber warfare actually illustrates the real problem that we face in the kinetic domain. Because in cyber warfare, because of this amazing property of computers that they can do the same thing billions of times, one person or a small group of people are able to cause damage on a global scale. So I know this conference is about the responsible use of AI, as if the AI weapons are going to exist and all we have to do is make sure we don't misuse them. I think that's an enormous mistake, because we also have to be responsible about the decision to allow a given class of weapons to exist.
The other reason we ban weapons of mass destruction is because of the indiscriminate killing. And that's exactly the problem Stuart's speaking to. How do we get governance? There are so many levels now that we've got to pull back. For example, the very idea, the conception of what warfare is. Why are we having this conversation only in individual countries and in the high-tech countries? This is not the way to go forward to keep the planet understanding what the concepts are for the future that keep us human and keep life on the planet flourishing for the next generations.
Some applications of AI, there are a lot of risks and challenges, and we need to understand that. And we stand ready to contribute with our knowledge and expertise, and expect governments to involve us in developing the future policies around this, just like our hosts has invited us here today to participate. So looking forward to this continuation.
In the end, it's always the human who needs to make the decision. And even in warfighting, it's so different. If you allow a machine to make a decision, or a human being with a lot of experience, with a totally different sense of what's ongoing, so therefore, whatever we're talking about AI can be helpful, can be supportive, but never let the human out of this responsibility he has to bear. AI can help. We have to understand how it can help, but never ever hand it over to AI.
So we've just shown you a snippet of one of the panel discussions. I must say, for me, that panel discussion was absolutely riveting. I think it was just seeing the plurality of voices in the same space, the differences between them were so stark, but there was a collective acknowledgement that artificial intelligence in the military domain is not a topic that we can delay for another day. Just to take a look at where we've been and how the day has progressed thus far as we build up to the closing part. I'm very delighted to be joined this afternoon. Just bear with me. We're joined by Mr. Jeroen van der Hoven, University Professor of Ethics and Information Technology at Delft University. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And making an appearance again, Wouter Jurgens, who we had an interview with earlier from the Foreign Ministry. Thank you very much for joining us. So I've nailed my colors to the mast. I've said that panel discussion was for me very riveting. What stood out for you, not necessarily today, but in the last 2 days?
Well, I think it's the general spirit. You know, I would qualify it as a kind of a spirit of humility instead of which is the counterpoint to a kind of a hubris that you often encounter in these kind of high-tech domains. And it's acknowledging that there is a lot that we don't know, and we really have to kind of sit down and think about thoroughly. So what is the nature of AI? You know, what are the diverse contexts in which it is applied? Who are the users, the stakeholders? what is the meaning of the core notions that we are so eagerly using, like responsibility and control. So this is the beginning, and I think that what we've seen in the last 2 days is actually acknowledging that it is the beginning, and it requires a follow-up, and a decent and thorough one.
Yeah, I'll bring Wouter in just a moment, but because we're talking about actions of the state and government, and I don't know if I'm misreading it, but I sense a certain vulnerability and humility, like you said, by member states, by governments.
Yes.
Because if we remember the words of the foreign minister yesterday, he did say that technology is advancing at a rate faster than what states can keep up. And I think that acknowledgement is very important, isn't it? Because it informs moving carefully and negotiating your space and knowing that things can go wrong if you don't consult and engage widely.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's very wise to put this notion of responsibility and human agency, let's say, center stage. Because that is, I think, being a professor of ethics, as you would expect, is what is at stake. It is we tend to forget that we are coming to the subject matter, AI, with notions that predate, the age of high technology. So these notions of responsibility have been with us for hundreds of years, and they have served us well. But now we have to recalibrate, and we have to make them fit for purpose, for this purpose. And therefore, we have to redesign them. Let's say we often refer to this as conceptual engineering. We have to see, what responsibility and accountability mean, and I've sometimes used the metaphor of we're trying to repair a Swiss precision watch with a hammer, right? So these are all blunt instruments. We know what we mean, what we're after, but we really need to sit down and think carefully about, how we can achieve what we want in the present day and age.
Let me bring you in here then. Often when it comes to warfare and military and defense, people can be quite skeptical and not trusting of state actions. One of my speakers yesterday, one of my guests yesterday said, look, we have international law, we've got international norms, and the fact that some players break those laws doesn't in any way invalidate the importance of that law. And that perhaps the best way to approach AI in the military domain is to think it still has to be governed by international law. We're not necessarily in a new space where the way we conduct our affairs is going to be too different because we're still confined and constrained by multilateral organizations and the letter and the spirit of the law. Would you say that will apply with AI?
Well, I would largely agree with that statement because international law will be the cornerstone of our actions, will be the cornerstone, as we've seen in the debate this morning, when we judge responsibility and accountability and governability of these issues. On the other hand, we have to also acknowledge that technology is advancing and that this technology gives us different challenges than some of the challenges we've seen with earlier systems. So what we have to do, and I think what this conference aims to do, is to see how we can relate to this technology, because it's not going to go away. And it has many advantages, and I hope we've also made that point during this conference. We want to nurture that. At the same time, when it's applied in the military domain, we believe very strongly that we need to come together as international players, governments, civil society, the private sector, academia, because we need to develop a framework of how we relate to this technology with, like you said very correctly, international law as the cornerstone.
The reality is that we citizens vote for governments, right? Here we are in this field where we acknowledge that governments' own grasp of the issue is not yet on par with the innovation itself. How do you create a level of certainty and even trust? Should citizens still trust that the state is in control, where in AI it seems like the greatest and most innovative person is in control?
Look, that is a fair dilemma. I think because of the fact that the technology is advancing so rapidly, it's difficult to keep up. It doesn't mean that governments don't understand the technology. It's more that in order for governments to regulate this technology, even if we can, because I'm not sure that we can govern all aspects of this technology, it's hard to keep up because our democratic systems work in a way that, for example, for new laws to take time. On the other hand, I also believe that we can act swiftly when it's necessary. So for me, the balance should be in making sure that we get all voices heard in this debate. And like I said, and we've seen at this conference, quite strong debates of proponents and opponents of this technology. And I would even agree with some of the people who say that we should ban this altogether. But unfortunately, we cannot wish this technology away. It exists, so we have to relate to it. And as governments, we simply we have an obligation to relate to it. But we've heard civil society, we've heard academia, we've heard the private sector, we've heard different governments, and as we have seen in the roundtable, there are many different voices there. But we've had 80 governments participating here and acknowledging that this subject is an important subject, and that for me is a big accomplishment.
And again here, Professor, I'm thinking it's also another new avenue for heightened collaboration between the private sector, academia, and the government. Thinking of my country, South Africa, if this were to be high up on the agenda, I can't see how the government can pull it off without the innovators, without the financial backing of the private sector, and without the expertise of academia. So that's an opportunity, isn't it?
Sure. And I think we've seen that in other domains as well. In healthcare, you need each other. So we call that the triple or quadruple helix. You will have to find constructive collaborations. Having said that, a kind of a critical footnote to that is that each of those parties is coming from its own kind of perspective, with it bring its own kind of norms and interests to the table, and we shouldn't be naive and acknowledge that as well. So we should benefit from each other's expertise and knowledge in trying to solve kind of these large, societal problems that we have on a global scale. Call them the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or kind of a subset that we're discussing here in those 2 days. But we have to come together and we have to acknowledge that each may have an agenda as well, right? So we see that in the debates about big tech, for example. And that also needs to be regulated. And the European Commission is, for example, doing that, and other people are following that example. So that is, we should not be naive. So, but having said that, yes, we need each other.
Yeah, because it's not a utopia, is it?
It's not. That's indeed the gist of my critical footnote.
Yeah. And just on that again, Prof, let me engage you further on that. When I listened to some of the presentations from academia and from civil society, I'm thinking they were so robust, so hard-hitting around concerns of bias, which is real, concerns around fake information and how it is impacting our lives, and also concerns around at which point is the human present or out of the process. And I think those challenges were so tangible that they would have to form part of the governance and ethical framework.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a matter of designing in our ethics and our principles, right? So we have these ideas about equity and fairness, and about security and safety and privacy. And this is nice to have those kind of philosophical or ethical debates, but at the end of the day, they will have to surface and emerge and be implemented and incorporated in the technology. That's where the rubber hits the road. This is where the difference is made in the lives of ordinary people, civilians and patients and consumers. So that is the challenge. So we have many of those kind of high-level debates, and the law and international law is full of those kind of terms. And now it's the time for us to kind of see how they would work out in the systems that are fielded or that are used, and that will make the difference in the real world. So and that is, I can make it sound relatively easy, but that's where the difficulty is. And you see it also in the confrontations, in the debates. You have the world of the representatives from Saab, or kind of the manufacturers and industry. You have the military, and you have the international lawyer. And these need to really come together and emerge in services and products, and in devices and in systems.
Wouter, again, I mean, I know you're a diplomat, so I'm not going to put you on the spot here.
You can always put me on the spot, no problem.
Be careful what you ask for. Be careful what you ask. I'm just thinking that amongst states, I mean, I was watching, it's a very compelling image of these delegates from different parts of the world with their flags there, their ministers or representatives speaking. And you look at them and you kind of know that there is a united front, but amongst them, there must be contestation, there must be differences, there must be different levels of expertise, there must be interstate contestation and competition for dominance and so on. How difficult do you think it's going to be at a very diplomatic level to get all countries to come together for a consensus globally?
It's a good question, but it's also why I became a diplomat. Because I think it is key to have these kinds of discussions about topics that are difficult and in which inevitably there is competition. Technology has been a driver for competition throughout the ages. And yes, states try to get the upper hand by developing technology and by trying to use it also in the military domain. On the other hand, humankind has seen in a number of instances what weapons of war can do, what technology in the hands of the military can do. And I think sees now, and has seen in the past, on a number of occasions, a clear need to work together to avoid use of this weaponry that is a threat to humankind overall. And I think AI in that sense is different from, we've seen parallels with the nuclear domain, with the chemical weapons conventions, with landmines. AI is different in the sense that it has a very clear civilian use. So it's also a different kind of dynamic. But that being said, the fact that 80 countries showed up here in The Hague to talk about this topic, I think highlights that we see the need to talk about this topic, that we cannot allow unlimited competition for military advantage to play, to have the upper hand. We need to also work on frameworks for responsible use. And I hope that this conference will have ripple effects in other fora, in the United Nations, hopefully in the G20. We had our friends from India here, but also in other fora, in the G7, and that this is picked up because it is a topic that is important and urgent. We cannot wait.
Okay, Professor, I beg your indulgence for just a minute. I'm a journalist. It's my job to be skeptical and not believe everything that comes from government. And I also know that states sometimes have imaginary enemies, that they talk to their citizens about having an enemy and justifying military spending and all of that. That is a reality. It certainly happens in my country. But something came up again and again and again. And I wonder whether we must embrace that, or is it just a subterfuge for governments to justify their investment in military innovation and their expenditure? And this is what came up, that whether or not you embrace artificial intelligence in the military domain is irrelevant, because the bad guys, something that Amnesty International threw out of the water, saying there's no such thing as the good states and the bad states. We all are a human chain, and we make mistakes, we do wrong things, we make bad decisions, we violate international law, some more than others. But the whole notion that if good states are not embracing and innovating artificial intelligence in military use, the enemies, as it were, the rogue states, are doing it. So that kind of justifies our acceleration thereof. I wonder what your thoughts are around that.
That's a key question, and I think you're fully justified asking it. I do think, and it's a kind of a more personal note, that we've had these long debates about killer robots, and in my field, in ethics of AI new technology. And so some 10 years ago, I would have taken a slightly different stance or taken a different point of view on that kind of discourse that you're now describing. But I have to say that as an ethicist or a moral philosopher, I do value these kind of the very fundamental values that are pretty much very widely shared among all the peoples of the world. These set of core values, and we see them trashed often. And I think we are justified in defending those values. And if our evidence prompts us to take action and help ourselves to the means to be effective in that respect, I do think
let's be ahead of the game. Okay, let's wrap it up there. Mr. Jeroen van Hoven and Wouter Jurgens, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's go to the closing session right now.